Well, welcome everyone. It's good to have all of you here. I hope that you're doing well. We're now our February 24th meeting for the HP 2312 53 task force. You should see the agenda on screen, and if you need to, you can click over depending on what version of Zoom you have, you may need to switch to the presenter's content screen. Here's the agenda for today. Welcome. Mission accomplished. We've got our review that we're walking through right now. Just two big items for today. The first is to get our update from Colorado Future Center and where they're at in the process. This is just an interim update at this time. And then the big item for today is the facilitator search. Kate can give us an update on the selection, the selection process as it has unfolded right now, kind of the current thinking on the last two contenders, and then we can see if the group is comfortable today moving forward with one of those. And then it's going to be comments from the task force, public comments, and then we'll be on our way. That's the tour for today. Let's go ahead and start and ask, do we have any questions, any administrative questions? And any questions from the task force before we move to Colorado Future Center? Everyone's good. Okay, fair enough. Well, in that case, Colorado Future Center, you're on. Where are we at? It's basically done, right?
Of course.
Actually,
we are happy to be further along than we were hedging our bets a little bit, but we're quite far along. So we've got a nice bit of information to share with you that I'm going to turn it over to Jen to lead us through.
Great. And just sharing my screen here. Confirm with everyone that you can.
Yep, we can see it.
See the PowerPoint deck. Okay, great. And then let's see if this will disrupt anything. We go into presentation mode here.
Looks great.
You get the full screen. You don't have two screens. So just make sure.
We don't see your notes. Here. So
all right, excellent. I mean, not that there's anything to hide there, but little bigger in terms of the visuals. All right, so yeah, we're I'll just get back here. We're here with sharing this time period that we worked with you all on establishing an understanding of what things look like back to 2015 and looking at that overview of how things have changed in terms of corporate owned housing in the state. Just a little recap around this, what the inquiry is focused on is that identifying this inventory of homes in these time periods that are being held by this corporate, in air quotes, entity that have been taken out of what would be a traditional owner-occupied occupancy in that inventory, and looking at how those properties have been distributed across space. In this case, we have we'll get into the map, but we've stayed with the 17 county composition around the state. And this deck, we were able to then get through some of this analysis and start looking at that relationship between where there's been concentration of corporate ownership and a set of the social and economic factors that are happening more at the census tract level. Real quick note, just for our documentation purposes and just for clarity and know that this is public record, that we have some limitations in terms of how these data are presented in that it's a point in time that was provided through the assessor records for the individual counties based on the data requests that had gone out, and recognizing that this is a constant state of flux in terms of different ownerships over time. So these data, of course, are already dated at this point. And that in terms of the analysis that we've employed, what we've identified as best practices to compile this idea of common ownership of properties knowing that that's still in the end not perfect. But this is our best attempt to be able to identify what we see as like a common entity rather than the actual owner of record in the property records. And so that to some extent, based on the addressing that we utilized, there could still be some misidentified commonalities. And then finally, in terms of our effort to employ best practices to eliminate any properties that don't meet the definition of owner occupiable held by a corporate entity, so that in some instances we could have excluded in the counts that might not necessarily need to be in there. Quick just glimpse in terms of this intersection of the time periods we were looking at and the composition of the counties that we were focusing on as we collapsed just the 7-county metro Denver region in there just for ease of number, that we have the records for all those 4 periods, 2015, 2019. It uniquely is the only composition across the county's selection in 21 and then 2023. And then as you can see, the other remaining, the other 10 counties, everybody participated in terms of data provision other than Pueblo for 2015. So we have a little bit of a sidebar set of information that culls Pueblo out. So overall, we're going to share what that big picture was for especially the 3 distinct periods for the 16 counties, where we're then breaking Pueblo out for just 2019 and 2023. And then we are also able to present Denver, Metro Denver, 7 counties for 4 periods over time, including that interim year in 2021. And finally share the correlations that we ran for all the 17 counties in 2023. And there's just a little reminder of how we kind of couched exploring what we mean by owner occupiable properties and the corporate ownership. So reminder again, this is the distribution of what the 17 counties look like across the state. The composition of the 17 counties represents about 90% of the state's housing stock and the population, and encompasses over 2 million parcel records. All right, so here is our snapshot of what we saw over these 3 time periods for the 16 counties, all counties less Pueblo. As you can see here that in aggregate, the total number of units held by a corporate entity has increased over time, and it has also increased as a share of the total owner occupiable units. So we've seen housing unit growth over time, and leading into the 2023 snapshot that we have just a little bit over 3% of the share of corporate held units in the state, in the 16 counties, sorry. And looking as well at, the breakdown, we'll have the breakdown here in terms of the number of units that are held in the portfolio. Looking just more broadly of the average number of units in the portfolio. So looking at the total units that are held by a corporate entity in comparison to the number of those common entities. And you can see here as well that average number of units in the portfolio has increased between 2015 and 2023, which we're interpreting as a small indication of concentration. Perhaps, that moving in that direction where economically it could be a signal towards less price type competition. And then within the
I'm
17
sorry,
counties,
real
does
quick,
it get? Oh,
Jennifer,
I'm so sorry.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I just want to make sure I didn't miss a decimal there. So I'm looking at the average units in portfolio. So that's not 400 to 600, but rather it's a shift from 2015. The average was around 4.5 homes in the portfolio.
Correct.
2023, the average is now just less than 6 units on average in the portfolio.
That is correct. Yeah,
Okay.
there's a decimal point there in
Okay.
that axis.
And
Yes.
Teo, thanks for pointing that out, because this little note here about concentration was when Jen and I were musing about, at what point does concentration get large enough that you start to worry about price control, the price uncompetitiveness, I should say. My gut's telling me that 6 is really not getting us there, but it is notable that the concentration, you're going to see it probably a couple times through this presentation, that concentration is slightly increasing as the years go by.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate
Yeah.
you clarifying.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, Teo. And then this is just a summary. We grouped the counties into regions just so we could more succinctly show where the inventory volume, that overall volume of units held. You can see overwhelmingly in the 7-county Metro Denver, North Front Range, inclusive of Larimer and Weld counties. Colorado Springs is just encompassing El Paso County. You can see that I-70 West corridor that includes Summit, Eagle, and Garfield counties, and then the western slope where we have Mesa and Montrose and La Plata counties. So very, very small in terms of the overall counts relative to Metro Denver, which holds about 55% of the inventory. And here again, Phil said we have a few of these charts that are showing, where we've seen that share of the corporate owned, of the owner occupiable inventory increase. And that has been the case in each of these regions around the state. Each region has increased relative to the 2015 period. And you'll see when we are able to break out Metro Denver that we'll have that interim, that 2021 period. But overall, between 2015, 2023 has seen an increase in that share over time. As Pueblo, as a breakout, it is the lone one that actually saw a little bit of a decrease. However, we don't have the period for 2015 to compare, but just looking from that 2019 to the 2023, actually saw a reduction in the number of these corporate held units. And so back to the 16 county composition. This was looking at the size of the portfolios that was outlined for the scope. So these smaller portfolios, the 3 to 9 units, and then ranging up to these mega investors. You can see there for those different periods, 2015 in the light blue, 2019 in the dark, and then the orange in the 2023, that the largest concentration has continued to be in that 3 to 9 units, and with a little representation of the portfolios that are 10 to 20 units in size, but relatively very small in terms of total counts it over these the large and the mega unit categories. Oh, sorry, was there a question?
Yeah, hi.
Yes, please.
So this is fascinating because these are kind of, earlier we talked a lot about different categories of owners, right? So these are like what we had talked about, the mom and pop type of owner, right? Not necessarily, certainly not the mega owners or even kind of these mid-size owners. Do you have a sense of what types of organizations these are? Are they corporations? Are they trusts? Are they family, you know, owners of different types? Is this something that you're gonna be able to describe?
We have we don't have that synthesized right in this deck.
Yeah. Okay.
But we do have, that essentially that flag type, that was, like you were saying, Adam, the various different types of naming conventions that could signal some type of corporate entity. I would say that the vast majority of the properties, and like I said, we didn't synthesize in counts here, but the vast majority are held in some sort of like LLC vehicle. And I would say secondarily in like an LLP type
Yeah.
entity. But we
And
have in our, in terms of the deliverables, like delivering also just the flat files of all this inventory for the task force's utilization. But yeah, there's I would say the preponderance. We could circle back and give a summary count based on those types of entities that were flagged. That gives more specifics other than me saying them.
yeah.
But they are the majority are in the LLC kind of category, if you will.
Okay. So just to be clear, when you're talking about LLCs, these are LLCs that are not associated with the larger, these larger entities that we've been talking about, Bridgewater, et cetera, right?
Well, to the extent that it's tied in, behind the scenes, we had no way to be able
Okay.
to, other than by hand, construct like a relationship. That was just not in the realm of feasible, just because of the pure volume. Because I mean, we're still talking about like 9,000 entities here.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Great.
Wasn't there a discussion about linking addresses though? Is that
Yeah, so
that reflect?
everything's these common entities are based on common addressing. And so there's, that gradation from the individual owner name entity unit that then collapses further by like a 2-to-1 ratio between that and then how we have identified common addressing to look at this proxy as a portfolio entity.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so these numbers of entities that you're seeing reflect that common entity process that we went through. What could be missing, to Adam's question, is if there is an LLC that is, behind the scenes attached to one of these common entities, but not with any kind of identifiable way for us to know it, no common address, no common name. They could be lurking out there still, because we didn't look up every single one of them and research them for their relationships, but we did our best to identify and collapse them into those broader common entities when there
Right.
were ways that we could identify them through the data.
One of the ongoing issues with this type of analysis is actually making that linkage. That you know, uh, a corporate entity can have multiple LLCs that are focused on in local markets, right? And trying to get a handle of that, I know, is difficult. It was really hard when we were doing our pilot work in just a couple of counties. But I wonder if this is a step that's feasible because it may overstate the character of these smaller LLCs. I mean, because it looks like, if just making things up, say you say that you had 100 LLCs in there, and even 10 of them were owned by um, America Home Products, whatever. Um, that would suggest that there's more of a corporate role in the housing units than we might otherwise conclude. So that's one of my, it's a question that I have, which I'm sure you'll be able to, you'll clarify for us when we get later on. But this is very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I think to your point, Adam, of like being able to link to like who these entities are that then transcend markets, that is something like reaching outside, in terms of these commonalities, common entities that are operating in other states around the country, is not something that we had visibility through the data that we had available to us, this time. And and even so, even with a best practice around looking at the common addressing, they're registering these LLCs in individual states. And so like tying that back to a mothership address gets extremely challenging through those entity registration processes. So yeah, definitely a blind spot for us in terms of that connection more broadly. I think one of the points of suggestion and when we had shared the snapshot of what things look like in 2023 back in the fall, was looking at this relationship of where we were seeing concentration based on valuation of the corporate owned properties. And so looking at this, we were looking at across the property valuations relative to the whole inventory, and seeing how we benched to these valuation cohorts for 2023 and then inflation adjusted back into those period, the 2019 and the 2015, to look at where we were seeing, where we seen relative concentration in these lower property value ends. And so you can see here like that in that 300,000, like that's sort of elusive value valuation, of course, not market price. This is based on appraisal valuations. Is that share has been increasing over these time periods. That is both a function of the holdings, the number of units held in this corporate owned flag status, as well as the fact that we have not been producing homes in these valuation levels, right? So our denominator is not commensurately increasing in terms of that total inventory. So seeing this in that this concentration is also like largely under the 600,000 valuation kind of trended. But interestingly, we thought like, that's just where the market is not producing units in general. So we're seeing that sort of share increasing. This was just a snapshot of what was the sort of the square footage size of the units, where these corporate units are held in, and seeing that we've seen an increase actually on that higher end for the higher larger sized properties and 3,000 square foot plus, but also this increase in the under 2,000, the 1,500 to 2,000, and the 1,000 to 1,500. Thought it was a little interesting. We're not, like that up and down in the sub 1,000 square footage holdings. I'm not sure what's necessarily driving that yet. Haven't quite had a takeaway in terms of what could be driving that pullback between the 2019 counts and the 2023. But just a little sense of, they're largely smaller property, like smaller and also commensurate with obviously the valuation being on the lower end as well with the smaller square footage. All right, so we can move into Metro Denver here. And looking over time, so we have this additional year, this 2021 year, where we could say something about the units held by corporate entities. Seeing essentially the most growth, you can see here in Adams, Arapahoe, and Denver. Boulder kind of coming back flat, more expensive market, of course, county within the metro. But not surprisingly that Adams and Arapahoe and Denver commanding those increases. And here's just the share again of the inventory. You can see actually there was a little bit of a pullback in 21, and to some extent thinking about how behavior sort of, we put this light gray band in there for the shut-in period with COVID, just as some orientation around what was happening, and then some of the hangover, like the fact that we just didn't even have units even on the market to be able to transact. And so a little bit of perhaps an anomaly there just because of the unique behavior that was coming out of the pandemic. But overall, when looking back to 2015, giving us, still that trend where each of the counties within the metro were still seeing an increase in the share.
And Jennifer, this includes the mega ones as well as mom and
Yeah,
pop.
it's just the whole
across the board
composition of units that are sitting in those metro counties, correct?
But are there megas are all the megas in El Paso County, all the 1,000 plus, or was there one that's in the Denver metro?
No, they're sprinkled. They're just more they're highly concentrated
in El Paso County, right? The one thing, if I could add here, I think this sort of, we were curious about what the pattern through COVID was going to be, because there might have been an argument to be said that there was an incentive to amass rental units when we were kind of an attractive place for people to hang out during the pandemic, and was there some activity to try and seize on that demand. And I think these data, we obviously don't have them for the whole state, but given that the metro looks like this, I think it's interesting to see that COVID didn't really ramp up that activity at all. If anything, it seemed to stall during the pandemic, and now it seems to be, increasing slightly. But so I think we did, by having those 21 data in there, get a sense of, whether there was a big behavioral shift that the pandemic caused, which doesn't appear to be the case.
I would also throw out there for your analysis that there's a you can think of it as a secular trend that is something we should be considering, which is people incorporating. That is to say, they were rentals and they just decided to put them into, it was a mom and pop that had a rental that has now decided to put them into an LLC, or for example, has moved them into a trust. And so again, I don't know if there's a way to tease that out. But the question I would have is how many, if we overlaid this data with looking at non-owner occupied single family homes. So regardless of whether it was in their name personally or in an LLC, the question is, what is the trend if we laid that line over here of just simply look at the assessor's website and look at non-owner occupied single family homes to see what that trend is. Because that's what I wonder is the extent to which, if at all, just the simple switching of me owning the property in my own name versus me owning that property through an LLC is influencing this trend. Or this trend
to the
line.
extent, like you're saying too, like there was a quit claim and they're transferring into a non-individual that then ultimately is flagged by a corporate entity type. whereas the owner address remained the same.
Yep, I'd be curious to see to the extent to which Jennifer, that's an excellent way to try to tease that out. But it's something that I just know asset protection, as the baby boomers have gotten older, asset protection has become a major feature in terms of planning. And one asset protection measure is quit claiming those properties that they own as a rental property from their name personally into an LLC. And so that might create a kind of mirage. So again, just worth looking into if it's possible.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, I have to noodle on that a little bit, Tail, because this is people who own 3 or more. And so we have a little bit of an apples to oranges problem with that kind of comparison, because to the extent that we overlay it with just non-owner occupied single family homes, we're going to bring in a base of the 1s and the 2s to compare to this. So let us know. I think that's a great idea. And it's really interesting to see if what we're really just picking up is a change in legal structure and not an increase in concentration. But I don't know if we can do the right comparison to say anything because we did 3 and more.
Got it.
You know,
Okay.
I think you're right also, that's something to have on the radar, that we're starting to hear more and more about the wealth transfer that's going to happen as older people, essentially are no longer in their homes. And particularly when there's a death and an inheritance, we may see a lot of that kind of activity transpire, where like I know we did it, my sister and I, with a house we inherited in New Jersey until we were able to sell it. However, I think a lot of that's going to happen in the 1 and 2. Like, it would be a different kind of family that had 3 or more that then end up in our analysis. But thank you for that, because I like that idea. Let us just think about if there's a way we can figure out the right base to compare to.
Yeah. Well, I certainly appreciate that. Thank you for looking into it.
All right, so that was at least that summary, and this synthesis of our kind of takeaways of what we've seen in terms of the profile and those trends over this 3 to 4 periods, depending, or 2 to 3 to 4 periods, depending on the location, is that while we are seeing these modest increases in terms of the share held by a corporate entity, still is particularly a small share. And seeing that average portfolio size that we looked at the beginning has grown, indicating this direction towards concentration. And so the question still sort of remains around, to the extent that this the sort of scale at which these portfolios are operating, their ability to amass any sort of market power in the rents. And like we talked through shortly there while we were in the slide, is that at least for the view of Metro Denver, looking at the 2021 period, we saw that small decline. So not necessarily driving a spike in terms of the behavior of the collection of corporate owned portfolios. And then seeing that, we're still, I think, seeing that trend that the concentration, at least of the corporate owned properties, are still in that lower end of the valuation curve, and that is also, just at least in the share, is also a function of the production, of the lack of production rather, on those lower ends, smaller and less expensive properties. So the correlation analysis that we were able to do, we looked at this concentration at the census tract level with neighborhood the census tract characteristics around socioeconomic and demographic profiles. And so know that there's a lot on here to look at, but we were able to essentially, like I said, we looked at the concentration, that share of corporate owned units in the census tracts, which represents, at least for those 17 counties, this is 2023, 1,227 of the census tracts in the state. There's 1,449. So it's significant number of the census tracts. And here we've highlighted the bold variables that were more highly correlated and statistically significant, both on the positive end and at the negative association end. Nothing is particularly strong, though, however, in terms of that correlation coefficient, but we did see that, at least on that positive correlation side, this percentage of households that are doubled up, that is something that we have done quite a bit of work around at the center, followed by the BIPOC population and the number of individuals that have less than a high school education. And then you can see on the other end, actually median age is has the highest negative association with the corporate owned and so on and so forth on that higher end. So with the income variables and the bachelor's degree or more, sort of relating obviously within this relationship of where the valuation of that inventory is held. So Phil, did you want to add anything around any of this?
No, the one thing we went kind of back and forth about that fourth correlate down on the top, the share of housing affordable to the county median. So what that is for each tract, what share of housing by valuation would would be affordable to not the tract median, but the county median income, because that's what we had with at the 30% level, right, Jen? So that, the household wouldn't be spending more than 30% of its income. And I guess the one surprise to me was I would have expected that to have come out higher. I'm still noodling on what that means. I'd be interested in hearing what you all think, but so it doesn't really suggest that this is a phenomena, at least with these data, that suggests that I guess what it says to me is that there's more of they're not focused on only one kind of sociodemographics here, right? And that this notion of are these rental houses replacing, like this was our attempt at trying to get to that question about starter homes. There doesn't seem to be a strong correlation, not a very heavy correlation there either. But anyway, that was the only other one I wanted to point out because it was sort of the closest we could get to that question of the starter home question you have. We don't have any way of identifying, a true starter home, but you would imagine in an area where a larger share is affordable to the median income, especially in the counties we're talking about, because we don't have, Pitkin and some of the other really high dollar counties in here, that would be a proxy for where there's a lot of quote starter homes. And it didn't end up being very highly correlated. Jen, do you want to take questions now?
Yeah, Adam and Heidi have questions.
Yeah, just remind me, interpreting correlation coefficients, I know this is hard, but so the lower coefficient just focuses on median income. That means that in census tracts with a lower median age, with younger people in them, there are more of these households,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
As
so it's
the age
inversely correlated.
rises.
As the age, rises, the concentration of that ownership goes down. So they're not,
Okay.
I mean, it's pretty clear where they're not focused, right? They're not focused on households with, mature, well, I'm using the word old, probably people who are further along in their earnings potential. They're not focused on higher income areas. They're not focused, we see high correlations between income and education, so we don't see them in the areas where there's higher education. So there's a little bit of a profile about like where we're not really attracting that activity. The profile about where we are is, starting to emerge, but again, a little more muddled, like, because I was saying that share of affordable county, the share affordable to the median, I would have thought would have come out higher, you know, that would be a logical place. And we didn't see that rise to the top. So, but yes, you're interpreting it correctly.
And Heidi?
Yeah, so along those lines, did you look at the share? I mean, I think on the starter home question, that like the share of units that are priced below a certain sort of starter home price point, like 350 or 4. Because I think that would maybe be, it would be hard to do, but maybe be kind of insightful. I mean, the way that my interpretation of this is that the investors are just looking at return on investment, and so they're looking at, you know, areas where they can acquire a unit at a certain price point, make money off of that, and that those areas tend not to be areas where there are wealthier older homeowners. You know, the age thing, the over 65 is a little puzzling because we do have clusters of seniors in what I would call sort of a starter home, or starter home-ish. But I was just curious if there was like if you looked at like the share of units under 350 or 400 and the correlation there. But I think the thing with the share of households affordable to county median income is a little harder, because investors aren't targeting necessarily, like they're looking for units, not necessarily affordable, like a mix of units and affordability, if that makes sense.
I mean, we have the graphs that Jen presented earlier on that shows that, you know, they are highly, you know, to the extent they're highly concentrated anywhere, they're highly concentrated in that lower valuation band. We can certainly add it to the correlation, but I think we've sort of shown that, you know, that's where the majority of the activity is happening in, for sure, that sub 500 and really that sub 300 to the extent any of that still really exists in Colorado.
Okay, thank you.
So did we have were there any other questions? So with that, and Phil said, it's not the clearest picture of where we're seeing this sort of relationship socioeconomically and demographically, but you know, this sort of summary, and you know, there's still perhaps other, you know, I think perhaps when the task force goes through like that engagement process and the listening tour, that more of those sort of qualitative experiential pieces can come out. But in terms of just these like neighborhood, or, you know, if you will, profiles around the demographics and socioeconomics, is not painting a particularly strong picture across the board. And so that is where we are in terms of what we've seen transcend through the 25th back to the 2015 period. And we just wanted to open it up around that, you know, how this is the initial thoughts, and sitting right now with the task force, and any kind of additional questions that this information might have brought up for you.
I'll just recognize myself. I guess I get to do that. But you know, I continue to be, first and foremost, impressed by the work that you're doing. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. I know there's a lot of consideration and noodling, as Phyllis said, to try to figure out how to, you know, what to include and what not to. So thank you for your rigor on this. You know, I continue to take away, I think, a very important point, at least to me, is the relatively small amount of concentration that we see in these units. That the average portfolio size being between 4 and 6 units, and then the average total inventory that's owned by these entities being in the low single digits. I think it's very different from a lot of the narratives that we hear, and I would just say, you know, if nothing else, that's an important fact and finding that I think this task force with your help can put out there to share. So that's just my feedback. But I see Heidi and Avilia have feedback as well. So Heidi and then Avilia, you're up next.
Sure, thanks. I just have one other question. I do recall that Dr. Billings' research looked at like the effect on home ownership. And I was just curious if you looked at that, and maybe I missed that. I'm sorry. I was a little bit late coming in. But the effect of home ownership of particularly BIPOC populations or populations where there are BIPOC clusters, this activity's effect.
Well, I'm gonna do the mea culpa on that a little bit, because we had the highest correlate here that I had us take off was with renter households. But I'm afraid there's a chicken and egg thing going on there that we don't have a good way of disentangling. So are they renter households because the investors have come in and gobbled up units, or have investors come in and bought units to provide rental units because they're households that didn't have the capacity to buy, and so they're providing, you know, some other service? So we could go back and do the correlations with tenure, but I would be really, my kind of gut sense is I think we need to be real careful about the interpretation there, because if you have a higher concentration of investors, you're gonna find a higher concentration of rental units and rental tenure. What we don't know is what's motivating that. And so we could go back and add it was, I think, wasn't it in the 40s, Jen? I think the one we took out
Yeah.
for rental tenure.
Yeah.
So it was the high one, but it seemed tautological. So I wasn't really sure about how to, like I said, how to interpret that. Fine.
Yeah,
I mean,
you're
you
gonna-
could look at, oh, sorry, Tay, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah, you're gonna find, if you go to Coors Field, you're gonna find more baseball fans than you would typically find in the general population, because they're going to the place where the activity that they're seeking is, and so I could see that. I think that what I would just say is I think it's worth observing, but again, I would just note the percentage of the total pool of assets to me suggests that it's not a causal thing. That is to say that there's not enough concentration of ownership of these units to distort the market.
Sure.
And at least that's what I see. If 40% of the rental housing was owned by large corporate entities, then I would see a concentration issue. But it's a small fraction of that. That's what I see. But again, I throw it out there for you guys to you've looked at the data more closely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you could see some, if you had a more narrow geographic look, like you could see some activity in sort of submarkets where investors are really coming in and actively, I mean, that's what, Dr. Billings found, and that's what you see with some of those big corporate investor types, that they come in and they target certain like sort of like, what am I looking for? Like, neighborhood groups, and they're actively convincing those people to sell and then converting those into rental properties. But you wouldn't be able to see that in county level data, because like you're saying, Teo, that the share is just too low. With the rentals though, I wonder if, and this would probably be just too much in the weeds, but if you were able to look at sort of a before and after, areas of high rental concentration, and also look at where the types of renters, the complexes in which renters are living, to see, and that's probably just too much of a rabbit hole to really return any sort of meaningful data. But I'm thinking of, areas where, kind of similarly to what I'm saying, like you're seeing, or what we were hearing in some of the prior research presentations, there's investor activities. It's sort of, in some cases, it's predatory. They're going into these neighborhoods that are predominantly BIPOC, sort of affordable ownership, convincing people to sell, transmitting those into some kind of a rental, and then, there's an effective loss of home ownership into these sort of newer-ish developments. But I'm curious if you're also seeing that kind of activity in neighborhoods where the renters are occupying predominantly single-family detached or attached homes, and look at that kind of shift over time.
So a couple things, we might be, I wonder if we, okay, so the first thing, I just want to point out that these correlations are done on census tracts, so to the extent that, you know, those represent submarkets, like we couldn't do these correlations on counties, we wouldn't have enough, you know, degree of freedom or power in the association. So there's 1,227 census tracts here, so we are kind of getting into those smaller areas. I wonder, Jen, if we could look at the correlations between changes, like the change in owner tenureship or owner tenure. I think I made up a new word. The change in owner tenure from 15 to, let me think. So do we have discrete ACS periods here to 23?
We do. However, we have to do some transformation where there's been changes in census tract boundaries.
Right.
Have those.
And then the change in the concentrate, like maybe that Heidi could get at a
Yeah,
little bit of
like
what
where
you're
there's
trying
been
to
that
grapple
movement.
with, whether the change in concentration of investors is associated with a significant change in tenure. You know, BIPOC did come out high here to the extent anything's high, so it does sort of suggest some evidence to the kind of behavior that you know you're concerned about. Maybe if we pair that with those changes in tenure and try and note where those changes in tenure are happening, we might be able to get a little bit of insight. That's kind of what's hitting me, you know, again, with no noodling time, but
Right. I mean, I think it's something to consider, just knowing that the renter household correlation was so high. It feels like there is something there, and that's important, I think, for policy making. I mean, I guess I'm reluctant to say, oh, there doesn't seem to be anything going on because the correlations aren't what we thought they were. Because there could be something going on that you'd want to avoid that's just sort of being masked by the activity's not as significant, but it could get worse in the future. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I think it's I think the renter correlation is valuable and just something we probably should all think about a little bit. But I'll pass to Avi.
Thanks, Heidi. A comment on this discussion first. The correlations are going to be a little bit noisy, and looking at changes is going to be tricky because this is 5-year ACS data, so by nature is tricky. We don't have very good data to do this analysis. I have other two comments. One is on, yeah, sort of like the concentration metrics. I think if no other analysis is going to be done on the pairing of like the size that the number of units that each entity owns, I think it's very important to then note that this was done based on addresses and that this is then a lower bound of concentration and that the concentration can be much higher. And maybe compare to other estimates from the literature on what they're seeing on concentration. That's one thing that should be including, if that's all that can be included. And if not, you could even just take a sample of the other units that are not corporate, that don't have a lot of concentration, and just look in tax records and do a deeper dive on a sample of them to see if that's a bigger problem. And note that in the research as well. That's one thing. And the other, my other comment is that on these correlations, a useful thing that you can also look at, since the data are at the census tract level, is HMDA data. So you can compare where people of color are applying for mortgages and getting accepted or denied. And you can look at the census tracts and you can look at the price points and loan amounts. And you can not only look at or loan originations, but also at just the volume of applications. And there's a bunch of historical data on that as well. And it might give you a better sense on the, like you said, the affordability part, because right now share of housing affordable I'm assuming you're using like the value reported by the ACS, which is self-reported and not provided by homes that are going in the market. So just something to consider to add to that analysis.
Well, it's assessor value, it's not the ACS, so.
Oh, okay. Okay, I see.
Uh,
Yeah, but the home data is going to include race and ethnicity of applicants. So
Excellent, thank you.
and that's it.
Yeah. Any other questions or feedback for Jennifer and Phyllis? All right, well, thank you for your continued work on this. We certainly appreciate it. We know this is an interim update, so we certainly hope our feedback has been helpful for you, and we look forward to continuing to hear from you. With that, let's go ahead and move on to our update on our facilitator search. So Kate, I think you've got this one.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So we received the task force received 9 different proposals, or 9 proposals for from 9 different potential facilitators. And Adam, myself, and Leah reviewed those 9 proposals and narrowed them down to 2 that really kind of rose to the top. We used a matrix ranking system in each independently reviewed the proposals. And the ranking system was based on the criteria of the qualifications of the facilitator, the approach and methods that they proposed, their experience doing similar work, that whether or not the budget was within the scope or the kind of our intended budget, and whether or not it aligned with the task force's timeline. So that was sort of the approach. So again, 2 rows to the top, and our suggestion to the task force is basically to have you all review those proposals, and as well as a couple of follow-up questions that we had for those candidates, and then kind of make a choice. And I think we're happy to kind of chat about what we saw in those proposals, or kind of relative to others, if that's helpful, or maybe it's helpful just to talk about the 2 proposals that rose to the top and whether or not there's one that the task force would like to go with. I think one consideration is just because a number of task force members aren't able to attend today, it might make sense to kind of take a vote later in order to have a little more time to digest those proposals and the responses to questions, and for more task members to be engaged. So that's my spiel, and happy to answer any questions you have.
I'm gonna start with a statement, which is to thank you for doing all that, and Leah, thank you for your work on that. Leah, do you have any comments, having seen all of these, that you want to share with the group? And Leah, I'm not able to hear you. Okay, it sounds like Leah's is going to working through some audio issues.
Okay.
So let me ask, are there any other task force members, or Adam, do you have anything you want to share or perspective on the process or on the 2 that are the finalists?
Yeah, I'll just talk a little bit about the process. One of the things that I was focusing on was really some of the details about the stakeholder interactions. And we saw, as one might expect, a great variety of responses to those points, from almost no response to we'll talk to whoever the task force asks us to talk to something much more structured. And the one thing that the 2 the 2 proposals we thought rose to the top featured was not only specifying a combination of in-person and virtual stakeholder groups, but also doing a more kind of qualitatively oriented survey, not trying to get like a representative sample of with quantitative data that we could run through an analysis, but rather to sort of get impressions of things. And I thought that that was an important and potentially positive set of recommendations, as we go forward. And this addresses a lot of some of the questions that Heidi and I discussed last month, and I thought they were that those two proposals really address things, particularly in response to the secondary questions that we asked. So.
Thank you. Any other feedback?
Hi, can you hear me? It's Leah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. No, I was just going to say, I think I would just piggyback on Adam's comments. I think they were strong proposals, the two that we narrowed down to. Just a couple questions related more to methodology, and then just one question, obviously, with stakeholder comments. I think that's an important part of the process, but as we've learned, the data is certainly super compelling. And so I think just one of the follow-up questions for the consultants is just more of, stakeholder comments. How do you also pair that with the data? So that was one of the things that was top of mind for me.
Yeah, I think, well, actually, let me ask if anyone else has other questions or comments they want to share right now. Kate, I think your idea of not voting right now, but giving feedback to the extent that's available, and then allowing the task force members to review this offline, I think is a good idea. So unless there are any objections, I'd say we plan on doing that. But now I want to invite anyone who is here, who has reviewed it, who wants to give comment on that.
I'll jump in and just share a couple of impressions, because I did look over the questions as well as the proposals, and I think they're great responses. I feel like CPSG's was a little more boilerplate and less tailored in its response, but I also feel like that facilitator is very qualified to facilitate more sort of politically sensitive, discussions like this one. So I did think that Paradigm was a little more tailored in their work plan, but maybe a little more naive as well in terms of like stakeholders and kind of what's needed. I guess I'm just skeptical of a survey, honestly, and like what that would yield given sort of the small number of questions. I think that Paradigm has planned with some open-ended question, but I guess I think this survey's useful to get qualitative information, but really it's not going to yield an in-depth analysis, I guess. I don't think it's going to offer what we just heard, in terms of depth of analysis. So those are just my reactions. I mean, overall, I think it seems like either one would work well.
Heidi, it's Leah. I think that just speaks to kind of my comment around your qualitative versus quantitative and just making sure we can better understand that. But I think that's a really valid point.
Just to follow up on this, discussions, in this context, a survey is probably the wrong word to use, because it's a way of collecting commentary, right? And this sort of, to the extent that the questions and the prompts that get provided put some boundaries on the topics people are going to talk about, I think it's going to be valuable. This was one of my questions that when we sent out the secondary questions, I really wanted to understand, because when I hear the term survey, I think of a sample and I think of an attempt to get a representative cross-section of opinions, which seem significantly out of scope. So that, perhaps, I don't know, we'll have to, maybe Phyllis can come up with a new term for this one too. But it's like, just trying to collect people's impressions. It's more like an impressionistic data collection in, in this case. But, and since, we don't have a crew of ethnographers that we could send out into the field, and,
Mhm.
so.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say one other thing on that. I mean, I think sort of given that statement, Adam, I think that I feel that CPSG's response to your question about surveying is a little more on point. I read paradigms as more in the analytical and quantitative space, and this kind of survey is not going to yield that. Like, it's not going to be meaningful in that way. And stakeholders are really hard to survey. Like, they just don't respond very well. And you're not going to get big numbers out of this. And so, particularly even given the time. And so I think this sort of capturing general opinions or informations, you're not going to get a representative sample. I'd be really surprised if you do, but I think that's the purpose, right? I also just want to, remind folks of the kind of political sensitivity of this effort and surveying. I guess I'm just walking through, like, what would you ask in a survey, given sort of the political sensitivity of this? You don't want to, and that there's a legislature in session right now. Like, you don't want to see people excited about, why am I getting this survey and what's going to happen and which legislator is running this bill that's going to hurt my business. So I think there's, I don't know, I'm just wondering what's asked, I guess, in this survey. And so I'm sort of discounting that, I guess, in terms of methodology, as like a valuable return, as opposed to like conversations and focus groups and sort of doing deep dive interviews.
Heidi, I would say I agree with you on that, and that's something where our CPSG, again, just giving feedback. The group, of course, will continue this conversation, but I did like how CPSG did have a lot. It seemed like they had a lot more stakeholder outreach. They had at least 8 stakeholder meeting inputs, and in addition to 3 rounds of internal stakeholder interviews. So it seemed that was more in depth. That's in contrast to Paradigm, which I think had 2. I could be wrong on that. But I think it was Paradigm had 2 stakeholder listening sessions and 2 stakeholder focus groups, which may be virtual or in person, whereas CPSG had 8 stakeholder input meeting groups, so double the amount. And they also, and again, it may have been boilerplate, but I will just say I was glad to see that they were talking about geographic diversity as well, to ensure that their outreach really does cover outside of the Front Range. So I think that was an important charge for the task force. So that level of stakeholder engagement, I think, was substantially higher for CPSG's proposal, and it gets at, I think, the issue that you were talking about. But they also had 2 surveys, so for what it's worth. So the survey is still on the table. It'll be interesting to see how it goes, but I tend to think that an aggressive stakeholder outreach would yield more relevant information for the decision makers that are going to be taking this information.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just one last thing too. I keep saying one last thing. Avili and I, we have new office space, and we have a really great space to do focus groups that's free. So if anybody wants to, I would just offer that to the facilitators. We're centrally located. We're on 8th and Sherman. And we have a nice conference room adjacent to like a kitchen. So if folks want to meet in person, that would be available and free, and there's parking too.
Great. Any other comments or feedback on this? Okay, let me ask the group, what do you think is a reasonable timeline? And I'm going to start with Adam and Kate to talk about, from a process standpoint, when does an answer need to happen? And then we can back our way into how long the task force members should be given to look at it.
Sure. I would suggest making a decision or kind of casting your vote by this Friday. And then it aligns with what we had in the request for proposals in terms of expectations in trying to make a decision by the end of February and to really keep us on track and to dive in come March. So that would be my suggestion. I would suggest perhaps a noon deadline, just so that we have the opportunity to harass you a little bit if we haven't seen a vote come in. So maybe noon by Friday would be what I'd throw out there.
I feel like you've worked with task forces before.
I have.
Yes, that sounds good. Unless there's any objections, I think Kate's plan is perfect. I would say, why don't we set a noon deadline, and then with the invitation and Kate or Adam, whoever sends out that email, I would certainly invite any task force members if they think that they can't make that deadline, but would like a reasonable extension. I would say we should offer that. But my bet is that everyone can have this done by Friday at noon. But let's at least give them the option to voice any concerns if that timeline is not feasible. But hopefully it will be. Okay, in that case, any other issues before we move just to general comments from the task force, anything we haven't covered so far, and then we'll have public comment. So any other comments or discussion from the task force? Okay, hearing none, Adam, what do we have from the public comment section?
We don't have any questions. If you have a comment to make, please add it to the Q&A and we will unmute you. While this is going on, given that this last discussion talked about open proposals, we're probably going to redact that from the recording, just, so that we don't run afoul of really anything. So when the recording comes up, notice that this big chunk will be removed. So
yeah, we can all start laughing uproariously, and then people will wonder if there was a joke they missed.
Well, you go for that, Teo. That's great. I'm not getting any response, so I believe that we will stop this, and then we can adjourn a little bit early today. And oh, one other thing I need to mention. We have been putting materials up on the Engage DOLA site that, it's been sort of a private repository for all of our articles and everything. That site is being discontinued by DOLA. So we have moved everything to a Google Drive, but if you need access to any of the past presentations that are not already on the website, or any of the past research documents, please send me a note and we'll get you hooked up to those repositories. This is a large internal thing that is going on in DOLA. Generally, we're trying to reduce our costs, and one of the tools that is a victim of this is the Engage DOLA site. So most everything else is available on the public website except for the extensive set of documents that we've had previously, collected previously during our literature review. We can get you those if you need them. So, thank you.
Thank you for that, Adam. Any other items? We do have one last agenda item, which is I am announcing my retirement as chair for the one meeting. So it's been real, but no, obviously I'm still in the task force. But in the spirit of rotating the chair around, I would say reach out to Kate or Adam if you are interested and willing to be a chair. Otherwise, we will we'll find someone who will be willing to do it. So I invite the members to contact us, or just look for an email if you haven't yet been the chair, and it may be your turn next.
Well, we'll do what we did last time, which is like, we'll just pick somebody in here, but we'll connect offline about that.
Perfect. All right, everyone, thank you very much. Again, Kate and Adam, thank you very, very much for your time. Leah, thanks for doing some heavy lifting at volunteering to help look through those proposals. Heidi, always appreciate your input, and Cynthia, I always appreciate seeing your smile. So, everyone, enjoy the rest of your month, and I look forward to seeing you next month.
Thanks
And
for your
look to
facilitation.
noon
Bye,
on Friday.
everybody.
Thank you too.
Bye, guys.
All right. Bye-bye.